going, everybody? I'm Mike the Gamer Guy, and unless you've been living under a couple thousand rocks, I'm sure that you've heard that the SNES Mini is a real thing and it's coming out September 29th. Now, I was actually one of the few people lucky enough to get an NES Mini when it launched, and while I really like it, especially since it allows me to play ROM hacks on Nintendo's official NES emulator, early impressions of the SNES Mini point to it totally blowing its predecessor out of the water. For starters, and perhaps most importantly, the game selection is just so much better, especially if you're a resident of Europe or North America. EarthBound, Super Punch-Out, Contra 3, Link to the Past, Super Mario World, and that's just scratching the surface, honestly. The concentration of great games here really cannot be overstated. The NES Classic had some good titles too, but many of them were on the very simple side and didn't really lend themselves well to extended playtimes, i.e. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong Jr., Ice Climbers, and a handful of others. Lots of Mapper Zero stuff, it seems. I know nostalgia probably played greatly into the decision to include these games over others like Gargoyle's Quest or Little Samson, but still. This is another thing the SNES has up on the NES Mini. The very nature of the machine means we're starting at a technical point that's many times better than the last NES games. So you can still play the nostalgia angle of early releases, while also having them be so much more involved and engaging. This isn't to sell the early NES library short, of course. I just think the strengths of those games don't translate as well here as that of the SNES does. All that in mind, there's one element that totally eclipses all of this nuance: Star Fox 2. If you would have told me that in 2017 we'd finally see the release of this game, I just simply would not have believed you. 3 years ago, maybe, given Star Fox Zero's announcement and its apparent ties to this game. But now? After Star Fox totally bombed with Zero, and top Nintendo officials like Miyamoto made strong statements indicating that they had no desire to return to this game. But here we are. Star Fox 2 is going to be officially released, and that creates sort of an interesting scenario. Despite never having been officially released until now, Star Fox 2 has more or less been available to the public for over a decade. In 2002, a late development version of Star Fox 2 leaked online. This was a major event and is seen as one of the handful of important releases in terms of the emulation scene. Through the power of the internet, we were all given the opportunity to enjoy a nearly lost gem of Nintendo. Well, after some fans patched together the last few bits of it anyway. Fans of EarthBound like myself will no doubt recall a similar situation with the game formerly known as EarthBound Zero, which received a virtual console release a few years back as EarthBound Beginnings, but was strangely missing from the NES Mini. Not only did those games show definitively the importance of emulation as it related to video game preservation, but they also, in my mind, were instrumental in building the honestly pretty weak case for reproduction carts as being distinct from pirated cartridges. Initially, to me, the idea that there's something legally grayer about your hobbyist-targeted illegitimate copy of Little Samson, as opposed to any of the dozens of pirated copies that were, or possibly are, being sold in Taiwan, for example, seems arbitrary at best. In both cases, you bought a cart with a stolen game on it, which its creators had no part in, and from which they will not see a dollar. That being said, there's a surprisingly large class of games for which reproduction carts are perhaps essential for truly experiencing and preserving, and that's unreleased or cancelled titles. While it's true that emulation goes a long way in helping us to experience these games many decades and decades into the future, even the very best SNES emulator will never be an SNES. Repros give us the special and rare opportunity to experience a lost piece of history as it would have been intended originally. But now things get sort of complicated, don't they? After all, this isn't lost history anymore. Now that Nintendo is opening up the vaults, paving the way for similar digital releases by themselves and others, is it time to reevaluate this thought process? This largely comes down to semantics, but I think it's an interesting point. Is EarthBound Beginnings an NES game, or a Wii U game? Is Star Fox 2 an SNES game, or an SNES Mini? Personally, I'm gonna have to go with the latter in both cases. And this is what creates the sort of interesting problem in my mind for future repos of these titles to be elevated above piracy. As I'm sure many of you know, the Wii U Virtual Console and the SNES Mini are simply emulators. But this circles back to what I mentioned a few moments ago. The best SNES emulator is still not an SNES. So when Nintendo officially releases Star Fox 2, there must be a conscious intent on their part to have the version by which all future versions will be judged run on their emulator first and foremost. By that same token, I don't consider something like Super Mario Star Road, an incredible ROM hack of Super Mario 64, to be an N64 game. as it and many other Super Mario 64 hacks were released with the emulator in mind first and foremost, since that's what people will actually be playing it on, and also in the case of those hacks, the game doesn't actually run on actual Nintendo hardware. I must assume that Nintendo held the same philosophy when releasing EarthBound Beginnings and now Star Fox 2. That's not to say being able to play these games on a real SNES or NES isn't extremely cool, but it seems ironically almost a little illegitimate now. SF2 is the real point of interest as far as this goes, since unlike EarthBound Beginnings, the ROM that's available online forever now, and which is the basis for every reproduction cart I've seen, is an unfinished beta that fans completed and translated themselves. Which means that the version of Star Fox 2 we'll be playing in September has never been played before, at least by the general public. It's within this distinction that I think that the case for all reproduction carts can be made, even in the face of digital releases via Virtual Console or the Mini Classics line. I think there is a real value in preserving the incremental versions of these games. I stand by my statement that EarthBound Beginnings is a Wii U game, but it wasn't always a Wii U game, and it wasn't always called EarthBound Beginnings. I still accidentally refer to it as EarthBound Zero, which was the fan-given name for the longest time. Being able to physically recreate their older incarnation would, I imagine, go a long way in helping to fully understand the final product. The same goes for Star Fox 2. Not only is the snapshot we got from the beta notable, but I believe that the contributions made by fans to complete it are also relevant to its entire history. And so yeah, I don't see any problem with continuing to make repos of these versions for years to come. That being said, I don't think I'm too hot on the idea of people cracking the SNES Mini and creating new repos of Star Fox 2 based on that ROM, even though I realize that's the first thing that's going to happen. I feel like it will sort of muddy the water of the history of Star Fox 2. This isn't to say that I wouldn't like to see a later version of Fox 2 get a repo treatment, or that the waters aren't already muddy, but I think I would prefer seeing the finalized ROM from back in the day being leaked, as opposed to using the ROM on the Mini, which could have undergone any number of changes from that final version. I guess we'll just have to see what the future holds. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope to return to the topic of Star Fox 2 in the fairly near future. Hopefully we can, day one, take a look at the SNES Mini or something, but I'd probably need to get a capture card before then, so we'll just see how that plays out. In the meantime, next week we have a review of Dream World Pogi, as voted on by my Patreon supporters. Dream World Pogi is a pretty interesting game for the NES that actually launched this year, and I'm kind of excited to talk about that. And then the week after that, we're looking at Nintendo Switch game cases, which was the last option available after all our polling was done. So we're going to take a look at that and then start a new board of potential topics. In the meantime, we've got midweek videos that might pop in and out, depending on, what happens in my life, I guess. I know someone suggested a long time ago that I do a playthrough of Super Mario World for the Famicom, so that's on the possible video list. Link to the Past playthroughs on a possible video list, I don't know though, for commentary and everything, or even a speedrun. I've been looking into speedrunning the Famicom port of Link to the Past, and it's kind of interesting. And there's also one huge potential midweek video that I think you guys are really going to like. Very fun and very bootleggy, but we're just going to have to see if that ends up working out. It might fall through. It all depends. We'll see. Aside from that, please leave a like if you like the video. Please subscribe if you want to subscribe to the channel. I think this is all kind of self-explanatory now that I'm saying it out loud. Leave a comment if you feel like commenting. And just a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, and I will see you guys next time.